Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel and you're watching TechStrong TV. Today is Tuesday, July 21st, and we're really happy to have you here joining us today on you know what, kind of dog days of summer. We're coming in already into the end of July. I remember when we were saying it was the end of June. It's July. Look, COVID's still a thing here in the U.S. If you're in the rest of the world, hopefully things are a little better for you. But the good news is, just before, coming on today, I was reading an article published, I think, in The Lancet on this Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine that they've been working on that seems to invoke both antibodies and T-cell response while some being safe. Of course, it was only a phase 1, phase 2 trial. It's moving to phase 3, but you know what? It was enough to brighten my day. I'm praying for a cure here, and I hope you are too. Anyway, COVID or not, tech world goes on, tech movement goes on, tech news goes on, and we're here to bring you what's happening in the world. I have a couple of great interviews that I've done I want to show you today, and then both Charlene and Mitchell have some great interviews as well, so I hope you're going to enjoy our show today. First interview I want to bring you away is from a company I want to highlight called Zebrium. And I spoke with AJ Singh, who is their CEO, one of their co-founders. AJ's a Silicon Valley fixture. He's been around a while. But I'm going to tell you something. I've been following the log management space for years and years and years. And Zebrium, when I did my research on this before meeting with AJ, I was genuinely excited because it was some of the newest innovative things I've seen in log management in a long time. They're really harnessing the power of ML to bring observability and monitoring by offering what they call autonomous incident and root cause analysis. And so to me, the holy grail of logs, and SIM for that matter, has always been actionable intelligence and then automating response. And I think Zebrium's a company that can bring that to it. So I had a great discussion with AJ about it, and I want you to check that out. After AJ, I have a good conversation with John Anand. John is a longtime analyst with Infotech Research. But before that, John probably has about 20 years in the field as an IT professional. And they sort of what the new normal looks like, how to prepare to bring your office back online, have some remote workers coming back. Maybe it's premature, maybe it's not. I don't know how many workers are really coming back to the office. I don't know if it'll ever be what it was before COVID. But anyway, John and I have a good discussion about this, and I think you'll enjoy it. And then, speaking of good discussions, my next one is with Tom Patterson. Tom, again, has been in the IT game for many, many years. Tom is the Chief Trust Officer at Unisys. And it's interesting, Unisys has a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, Matt Newfield, who we do CISO talk with. Then they've got Tom, who's Chief Trust Officer, and then they have another Chief Privacy Officer as well. So Unisys is a company, obviously, that takes cyber seriously and risk seriously. But anyway, we talked to Tom about the recent Twitter hacks, and then what it means for other companies. I mean, and we don't delve too strongly into what the repercussions of this Twitter hack were, but more importantly about what can organizations do to protect themselves. So good discussion there. Then from the Something Old archives, we go again back into TechStrong Con and my friend James Wickett. For those who don't know, when we talk about DevSecOps, give a tip of the hat to James Wickett. James started something called the Rugged DevOps movement. It's got to be 5-6 years ago. And Rugged DevOps really sort of morphed into DevSecOps. And it was really the kind of foundational work James did, and then meeting up with Shannon Leitz that led to a lot of what we see is DevSecOps today. So it's always a pleasure to have James speaking and presenting. He did me a personal favor presenting at TechStrong Con, and his James's presentation at TechStrong Con was on a new way to look at DevSecOps. It's something called Measure. MEASURE, and it's a framework for approaching DevSecOps in your organization. Have a listen, see for yourself. If James is behind it, I have a high degree of confidence in it. After that, I'll be back with the news as usual, some headlines around our sites. Then over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. Charlene has a good interview today with Jake Olscott of BitSite, why security managers can justify investments even as security budgets are being cut. I don't know why they would cut security budgets at this point. I think it's pretty important. Anyway, we'll go from there over to the analyst corner with Mitch. Mitch has two sessions today. One is to announce a new report that was commissioned by CloudBees, actually, but written by Sanjeev Sharma and the ASG team, and it's the state of software delivery management. It's a great report. I had a chance to read it over the weekend. I saw your final copy. Good stuff, excellent research. I think you're going to enjoy it. And it's the kind of research that I think we can expect from ASG going forward. So Mitch will give us a scoop on that. We'll also have later this week a interview with Sanjeev Sharma on it. And I think Mitch and I have a podcast coming up on it as well. So stay tuned for that. And then following that, Mitchell has a really good interview with Suresh Raghuram, co-founder and CEO of Platform 9. It's a company we featured before on DEVOPS.com, and interesting company, and Mitchell has a good interview there. And then I'll be back to wrap things up. It's a great Tuesday here on TechStrong TV. You don't want to miss this. Here's a quick commercial from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with our first show.
Join top experts and peers for a SPLUNK virtual event, DevOps Open Source Insights and Innovations. Open source powers the world, drives innovation in technology and in practice, and reduces the proliferation of products that just don't work together. In the arena of DevOps, open source tools and standards enable problems to get solved. Come take a look at some of the ways SPLUNK solves problems with open source and how we are contributing to open source solutions to make your work life better. Register today.
Okay, as I mentioned, our first guest today is AJ Singh. AJ is the CEO, co-founder of a company called Zibrium. And I was kind of gushing in my remarks earlier today, but I was genuinely excited when I did my research on Zibrium. You know, log management's been around forever. There's been winners, there's been losers, but there's been, you know, someone once told me if there's a lot of players in a particular market, it means two things. Number one, that market's big enough that people are chasing it. Number two, that there's no one solution that's really killing it. Zibrium could be a killer in this segment. I really like what I saw there. AJ Singh, their CEO, will tell you more. Here now is my interview.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another segment here on TechStrong TV. I've got a good segment that I was actually looking forward to doing. Let me first introduce you to Ajay Singh of Zibrium. Ajay, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thank you, Al.
So Ajay, I know over on our MediaOps webinars, we did do a webinar with Zibrium last week, and for anyone watching this, that webinar is available on demand. If you head over to our DevOps webinar page on DevOps.com and look on demand, you can find the webinar there, and you get the slides and everything. But Ajay, assume they haven't seen the webinar. They're not familiar with Zibrium. Can you give us the story? Who is Zibrium? What are they about? And what about your own background?
Yeah, sure. Let me start with the story behind Zibrium. So very young company, 2 years old, classic Silicon Valley startup, venture-backed. And the founding premise of Zibrium is to apply machine learning to make life easier for developers, DevOps engineers, and SREs. And we do that by automatically detecting incidents and automatically figuring out what's the most likely root cause of those incidents, because that is the bane of existence for a lot of people, particularly when they're responsible for more modern applications where things are changing constantly, you're pushing out new features, and consequently things are breaking constantly. So
Sure.
I can tell you more about what the state of the art in the world was before Zebrium, but it's a pain my own co-founders have lived with, having built monitoring systems and having to deal with the pain of constantly maintaining them. And we could see the way the world was evolving. There was no way human-built searches and alert rules were ever going to scale into the future. So my co-founders had this brilliant idea. Machine learning is actually very good at repetitive tasks. Why not apply it to this problem? So that's basically what we built.
Sure. And what about a little bit of your own personal background?
Sure. So, I've started my career as an engineer long ago, and I guess a short way to describe my career trajectory would be moving up the stack where the problems are moving and where the intelligence is moving. I started off a long time ago as an electrical engineer, worked on disk drive systems. Over the years, I realized that the harder problems were actually storage systems that added software to manage data, and spent many years with companies like NetApp and Nimble Storage, where I led the product management team, innovating in a layer above storage. But by the end of that run, it became clear to us that even storage systems were now, they were just building blocks. The problems had shifted one layer above, which is predicting when your applications were going to experience outages or slowdowns, and how do you improve that detection? How do you shorten the time to resolution? So my co-founders had built systems like that for multiple employers, and eventually gotten jaded with how brute force and repetitive and just how much grunt work is involved in maintaining these systems. And something clicked in our CTO's mind. It's repetitive for a human being. Machine learning is great at repetitive tasks. Why not apply it to remove the brute force effort from the humans' plate? And
Sure.
That's sort of the founding premise behind Zebrium.
So, hey, Jay, I have about 30 years in IT, about 20 in info cybersec, as we call it now. We used to call it infosec, right? So I'm no stranger to the log problem, right? And I will tell you, over my 20 years dealing in info security and logs and operations, we've seen the focus of where the problem is continually, let's say, move right. Rather than when we always talk about shift left in DevOps, the problem in logs has shifted right. Where I think the first issue was just collecting the data, right? And I call this almost like the SPLUNK era, right? Because when SPLUNK came around, to me, that was the big thing that Splunk got, right? It would collect data, log data from anywhere, man. You could, whether it was security logs or op log, whatever the kind of log data it was, somehow or another, it was like almost auto magic, right? Splunk was able to take that data in, and that was great. Now all of a sudden, we had all this data, and now the problem became, well, what the hell do we do with all this data? We were drowning in log data. And someone said, oh, this is great. This is what we call a big data problem, right? And we had things like Hadoop and Cassandra and what have you, right? And we started trying to get our arms around how to corral all this data and make heads or tails of it. And a lot of people thought that was the answer. But like you said, okay, so now we were able to store all this data, but the only way really to analyze it was brute force. There was so much data that you needed an army of people to sift through it. even running scripts and everything else, right? It was a tedious task. So you're right, and your CTO co-founder, right, is right. Machine learning would seem to be perfect for this. Of course, the road to perdition is paved with the best of intentions. Right? And others have tried, or at least they've given lip service to applying AI, machine learning, whatever whatever the nom du jour is. It's really machine learning. It's not true AI. To this problem with moderate success. Why is Zebrium different?
Yeah, you're exactly right. With your experience, you know how the space has evolved. And I can say a lot more about that. But to answer your direct question, what have others tried, and why has that not gone as far? There's two fundamental reasons. One is they were trying to tackle this problem in a slightly different era, where just pointing out unusual patterns was perhaps a good enough thing. If you were building a monolithic app, what's the first thing a human does when they sit in front of a log analytics tool and trying to troubleshoot a problem? The first thing they do is they may have a hunch, but they try to look for what's changed, what's unique, what's different, what's deviating from yesterday. And the first generation of attempts at anomaly detection just try to bring these anomalies to your eyes. There's two issues with that. One, the way applications are built today, they're no longer monolithic. They're no longer doing monthly or quarterly or even weekly deployments. They're 50 services, and each one is trying to move as fast as possible, perhaps doing multiple deployments a day. The nature of anomalies it's exploded, and the counts. A typical one of our users has thousands of anomalies a day. So even that's no longer enough. Yeah, right. It's too much noise. The second was a more foundational bet our co-founder made, which was the way to do things like machine learning and correlating anomalies between logs and metrics and traces is to build a different kind of foundation, which is a structured foundation. So the way log management has evolved is as a Google for log data. It's a search engine. It's a text search engine. It treats it as a text or string-based problem. And that's nice because semantically humans are searching for text. But if you want to apply things like machine learning, it's not so nice because you haven't deconstructed the actual printf the developer wrote. You haven't understood the unique event types that were in the source application. You came close by doing these strings look similar kind of matches, but you didn't quite get to the root of it. And we do that. We do structure logs from the source, understand the unique event types, understand all the fields within them. This one's a severity, this one's a number. We don't know what the number means. It's preceded by the word latency, but the number usually stays in this range, and today the number shot up here. That kind of thing was not possible unless you fully structured your data, and we were the first ones to do that. We are the only ones to do that today. The second, I made the observation that in a typical modern application, anomalies are themselves noise now. There's so many of them. So then we realized we had to build a higher level of machine learning that can trace correlation patterns across anomalies themselves and separate the noise from the signal. So you might have 1,000 anomalies a day, but probably there's only 3 or 4 incidents where these anomalies cluster together unusually, where you can trace this problem happened in this service first, and a millisecond later happened in this service, and then a millisecond later happened in this service. And that connection is very unusual for anomalous patterns. So we call that incident detection and root cause. No one has, other than us, built that level of machine learning on top of anomaly streams, partly because they haven't built the foundation the same way we have. So that's sort of the short answer for what others have tried, why they've had some success, but why those approaches are not, eventually extensible to where applications are going.
Excellent, AJ. So I this root cause and analysis. So first of all, before we get into root cause analysis, it almost sounds like what you're doing is you're able to associate context and syntax to the log files that you're analyzing, and syntax and context to the log files that you're reading. And of course, that's kind of where the human was able to do, right? A human could you put it in context. I don't know to this point if machine learning has been able to do it. So that, I guess, is a huge breakthrough. But then the next step is as you say, root cause analysis, and not just analyzing what the root cause is, but suggesting what the likely root cause is, which is a breakthrough, right? That's yet another step forward. And then I guess my next question to you is, okay, when do you take the next step, which is based upon root cause, either suggest the remediation or actually auto-remediate it?
Yeah, so we're tackling layers of complexity, right? One, the first layer, as you said, was the syntax problem. We didn't write the application. So just to deconstruct what the developer wrote and which ones are the same and which ones are different was a hard problem. We tackled that. Then there was the context problem. What's normal, what's abnormal, and how they're related. The third problem is a harder one. I wouldn't claim today that we tackle that entirely, which is auto-remediation, because we can tell you in a high percentage of cases what the likely root cause was. It was this rare event followed by these bad symptoms, bad error messages, fatal messages, et cetera, et cetera. So this collection defines your incident. But what we don't know is what's the solution for your application. Maybe it's reboot the machine. Maybe it's add more cache. So what we do instead is build integrations. So for a given incident class, you can supply a webhook with metadata and say, this should be directed to this runbook or this script. So that works if you know the resolution for a new issue. So obviously part of our value prop is we actually catch new failure modes. So unfortunately, the first time we catch it, you won't have a predetermined resolution for it. You won't have a runbook for it. But once you do, you can hook it up to our platform. And the next time the same kind of incident is encountered, it will automatically trigger whatever you had set it up to trigger, which could be the exact thing a human would go do.
Absolutely. Excellent stuff, though. It really is. AJ, if you don't mind, I want to pivot a little bit and get out of the weeds of the technology. Talk about, for our audience who they've heard enough, they're sold, they want to get their hands on this. What's the model here? How do people get the product? Is there a trial, free? Is there a community version, something?
Yeah, so it's a SaaS service. So, the best practices in SaaS are, of course, you want to make it easy for your potential users to try it. So there's a free trial for 30 days. And beyond that, there's a community version that allows you to have most of the features just with some capacity limits forever. So you can get all the features and unlimited capacity and ingest for 30 days. And after that, you can choose to start paying us. Or if you're a small organization or a small team or an individual, just experimenting, there's a free version that's free forever. We also, we try to leverage open source where people care the most, which is the data collectors that go into your application for a variety of reasons, for security, for community support, for having a proven install base of deployments in a wide range of environments. For all of those reasons, data collectors is not the place generally we should innovate. And when we try to use open source ones and we make them available on GitHub, that makes our deployment process very easy. It's one command, pulls down the collectors from GitHub, installs them, streams the data. It also lets you examine the collectors if you'd like. So that's the model.
Excellent. And of course, people can get it at the website, which is Zebrium, Brum, like an element in the periodic chart.
That's right, Zebrium.com. We know developers and DevOps engineers and SREs don't always want to talk to a vendor. So of course, it's a link. You click on it, plug in your email. It creates an account for you instantly, takes you to the install page and choose your environment. Click. It's a one command install for Kubernetes. It's a Helm command. And you're up and running within about 5 to 10 minutes. No configuration.
That's fantastic, man.
Yeah.
I love it. You know what?
Thanks.
This market, the whole logs analysis and everything has been in search. I mean, there's been companies that have been very successful, God knows, right? And there's a lot of companies that have tackled or tried to tackle the problem. But this, when I did a little research prior to our call, I was very, very excited by what I saw with Zebrium, and I'm looking for big things from you, AJ. I think you guys got something here.
Thank you, appreciate it, and that means a lot coming from someone who's got 30 years of experience in the space.
Yeah, playing in it. I look forward to it. So check it out on Zebrium.com. There's an open source. Well, excuse me. There's a free model that's free forever. There's a trial. Everything else, if logs, and it's not just security logs, for my DevOps people out there and SREs and developers, with testers, all of them. We've got so much going on, and there's so much data in logs, and if this is an issue for you, this is a fresh take on things. So check it out. AJ, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having me.
All right, Alan Schimmel, we're on TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue, or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
John Annan is one of my favorite kind of analysts. He's got 20 years of experience behind a desk or in the pits of IT, right, in the playing fields, not in the ivory towers. And so he brings a real, workman's view to what he does for infotech research. They recently did a report on sort of what the new normal is going to look like, how to start reopening offices, bringing people back, and what to do. I don't know if it's premature or not, but sooner or later we're all going to deal with it. And I also don't know what the permanent repercussions will be of this new normal. John and I had a good talk about it, though, and here it is.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this segment of TechStrong TV. My guest this segment is John Annan of Infotech Research Group. John, did we get that right?
Yes, you did, Alan. Thanks very much. Nice to be on your show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. So, John, before we jump into what I really want to talk about, I think we should give our audience a little background on Infotech Research Group and your own sort of background on your journey to here today. So why don't we start with who's Infotech Research Group and what do you guys do?
Excellent. No, thanks, Alan. So Infotech Research Group is a research and advisory firm based up here in the cold, wild northern Canada landscape, but we've got clients all over the world now. We've just recently opened an Australia office, lots of clients down in the States. We have an office down in the US as well, and in a lot of European and sort of Latin American countries. That's sort of where we spend a lot of our time. We research, IT process, and projects. We want to take the best practices that exist, whether it's a COBIT framework or an ITIL framework or a Agile Manifesto, and we want to put some practicality into those. So we want to see what the best the best frameworks that the industry has to offer, and then temper that with what actually works in real situations. So we work with our clients to do that, to customize those frameworks into things that actually can happen and work in the real world. We've got about 65,000 members, all individual, sort of director or manager levels of, various infrastructure, IT apps, security, CIO type practices. I came to Infotech about 5 years ago. I used to be I used to do work for a living rather than talk about doing work. I spent almost...
Welcome to the club.
It's a natural evolution, right?
Yeah, no, hey, it's not terrible. But go ahead, you spent 20 years?
Yeah, about 20 years in the value-added reseller, managed service provider, doing sort of solution architecty type stuff. So, and again, that really works well with the Infotech model, right? Because I don't want to be, we don't want to be just an ivory tower. Right? It's not about getting a 5 out of 5 on the maturity model for an ITIL capability, right? That doesn't help. It's about picking your battles, limited resources. What do I spend my time on? What's most valuable to drive value to the organization? So that's me in a nutshell.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Just one quick question. When you say there's 65,000 members, so that means a lot of the research, a lot of the analysis you guys are doing is... I don't want to use the word crowdsourced, but you use this community of members to kind of validate some of the research and some of the assumptions you guys are putting in your reports. Very much so. We're not generally trying to do survey-based research, so it's not like a pool of 65,000 people that we're constantly bombarding them with BuzzFeed-style quizzes. It is, here's the framework, here's a good academic rigor that has evaluated and put things together. Now here, 65,000 members, double check our work. Show us where we're wrong. Show us where this isn't working for you, or show us how it is working for you, right? Help us to make it practically better, not just sort of academically pretty. Excellent. Love it. So John, now that we've got that out of the way though, let's dive into what I wanted to talk to you about today. And this is some research that you guys had done kind of early on with COVID, right? People were, the scramble was on. Everyone has to convert to a remote workforce, and everyone's going to work from home. And my God, do we have enough devices for them? Do we have enough VPN access? Do we have, what's going to happen to our security? Should we just throw security out the window? Because we need to get people on the network. And, my chief architect's using his daughter's desktop at home because he can't get to his office machine. It was scary. That's about when we spun up TechStrong TV, right? To combat all that, we weren't on the road, and we figured people want to know about this. Talk to us. What is that? What the genesis of this, and take us from there. Sure. So Infotech fortuitously stumbled into the sort of COVID-19 research because we were actually doing our last live event. Our last live conference was in Orlando, Florida, immediately the week before the Canadian-US border shutdown. So had we been delayed a week, there would have been about 100 Infotechers who were going to have to self-isolate for 2 weeks upon returning home. So it was a really tactical, timely topic for us to begin to explore, right? That notion of how do I adjust my operations from that traditional on-prem environment where people are showing up to work, where work is a place, not a sort of series of things that you do, but work is a location. My work location was 345 Rideout Street. Your location was where you are. 888 Yonge Street in Toronto is our Toronto office, right? Work isn't that, especially in this pandemic response, right? Work has to be, distributed all across a wide area, one that was never imagined by the architects, right? They knew that they had different workplaces. They knew they had different branch offices. They knew where those workloads were, either in the public cloud or in server closets or data centers, and they knew that the users were coalesced around these locuses of
remote or head offices. Now all of a sudden they're in everywhere and they're all across the place and they don't have direct connections anymore. So that was a big challenge that we were trying to help our customers navigate through.
Yeah. I mean, I think, well, hindsight's always 2020. Let me say that up front, right? But John, I think some of the lessons we learned is that, some industries, some job functions lend themselves rather well to this, frankly, and others not so much.
Yeah.
Right? So I think we wind up seeing that disparity, depending on industry, on job function, and also, quite frankly, on the IT infrastructure of the organization. Right? I think that's another key.
There are definitely different types of work that are more amenable to remote. Right, just like there are different types of work that were more amenable to digitization in general. Right, that great promise of the digital workspace or the paperless office. Right, that works for certain types of activities that people do, but not necessarily for all of them. The infrastructure or IT readiness to support digital work, though, was a key differentiator between the people that were able to respond successfully and quickly to this shelter-in-place order and those that were really left scrambling, those that were going out to Fry's or the Best Buys of the world and buying up whatever consumer laptop they had and spinning up VPN connections, or even worse. I mean, we had tales of clients that were time sharing their VPN connections amongst their staff. So somebody would work from 8 till 4, somebody would work from 4 till midnight, and someone had the midnight to 8 a.m. shift. And that's just to manage their VPN connection and their bandwidth and their licensing. I mean, that's hugely disruptive. The problem, the hindsight lesson learned is that we knew what we should have been doing beforehand. Right? We knew that VPNs weren't a great way to enable remote access. We know that application-aware security is better than network layer security. We know that we should have been moving towards a zero-trust environment. We know we should have been moving to an SD-WAN or maybe a SASE, Secure Access Services Edge type model a long time ago. Well, maybe at least 2 or 3 years ago.
That is a long time. I mean, in our world, right?
In IT, for sure.
Yeah.
And no good infrastructure manager, no good architect ever lets a good crisis pass by without recognizing the opportunity. And the opportunity is here that we, as IT leaders, now get to sort of maybe prove to the business leaders that, yeah, you should have been listening to us. We wanted to ameliorate these situations. We wanted to transform, but you either didn't see the benefit, or maybe IT wasn't good about communicating the benefit. Maybe we just didn't make a good enough case. Unfortunately, this natural experiment has really shown us that, yeah, we should have been planning for these sorts of things well in advance.
Yeah. Well, and there's a couple of other things. Look, I run DEVOPS.com, Container Journal, Security Boulevard, so I'm, out there with this. Well, I try. But the fact of the matter is, I forgot what company it was I interviewed, but they have this notion of what they call SaaS ops.
Yes.
Where today, so much and so many of the applications that workers are using, whether they're in the office or at home, are SaaS-based apps anyway, right? And when I say SaaS, I don't just mean from a third-party app provider who delivers it via a SaaS model. Even our internal applications are hosted in a cloud somewhere and delivered via kind of that same sort of SaaS-y model. As you mentioned, they could be on the edge. And I think most IT leaders had in their mind that they had to get out of the moat and castle, right, network setup, that they were going to move more to a cloud and a cloud broker, type of versus VPN, that it was silly to jack all the traffic back into a central network, to go back out in the cloud, then bring it back into the central network and then send it back out. It didn't make sense, right? It wasn't an efficient model. But as business sometimes goes, nice to haves never quite make it, right? Their arms are usually, the arms of the budget director are too short to reach that far into the pocket for a nice to have, right? And so must-haves always win. And what we've seen is this has created a rejigging of the priorities of what's a must-have versus a nice-to-have. And I think, more VPN. And an interesting thing, John, this is my own personal, I don't know if your research bears this out and if your opinions bear it out. I think people short-term said, my God, I got to up our VPN capability because I can't switch horses in midstream here. I can't just throw away our VPN and have people go directly via a cloud gateway or something like that. So short term, maybe they bought more VPN licenses. A little bit longer term here, I think this has drastically accelerated the move away from that whole type of architecture to a direct-to-cloud model and what that entails.
I agree with you 100% on that, Alan. It's you want to try to change the engine when you're in the middle of the Daytona 500 race, but that's really challenging, and that's hugely full of risk. So yes, short term, just buy some more VPN licenses. Again, if your concentrator can actually give you that performance,
right, assuming you have it, right.
Right, and it still takes time to spin up a additional bandwidth. Maybe your MPLS was already tapped out. Maybe you hadn't been really able to take advantage of commodity internet. But the vendors were decently good about coming with stopgap solutions, right? AT&T had a managed sort of SD-WAN, VPN service rather, that they could do through commodity internet connections. They were being pretty agile and trying to help as well. The point that I would emphasize that you made, though, is that it was stopgap. It was short term. Right now that we're into a little bit of the new normal, now that we're beginning into that sort of wave 2 of some things are reopening, we've got a bit of breathing room. We're not trying to put out that shelter-in-place fire anymore. We're now looking for, okay, we did the VPN quickly. That was fine. What's the proper solution, though? Let's now start laying those blocks for, solving the problem properly as opposed to solving the problem quickly.
I agree. I described it even internally to our own team here. For the first 6 weeks or so of this, we kind of ran around with our hair on fire, right? But then you can't sustain that long term, right? It's not a sustainable model. And so at some point, like around June, we said, okay, what do we need for this new normal? What's it going to look like? How are we going to respond? And then we started taking the steps accordingly for that, and it was in retrospect the right thing to do. John, I'm wondering, the VPN was an obvious one. What were some of the other kind of recommendations you guys came out with here?
In terms of dealing with that short-term pandemic, or in terms of what they're going to want to do?
How should companies deal with this whole? I don't know how long it's going to last, or it really is the new normal permanently, But what do you guys see?
So what we're trying to encourage companies to do is work with their the time. IT and the business always have had sort of communication problems. Like IT is from Venus and the business is from Mars, and sometimes they speak in 2 different languages or at least 2 different dialects. And that challenge has been prevalent. I mean, that's sort of the foundational model of a lot of infotech research, is just trying to get everyone on that same page, right? And it's absolutely critical right now to make sure that you're talking to the business, right? IT and infrastructure aren't going to be the ones that reinvent the business model or the modality of how the business wants to do work, but they're going to be responsible for implementing it. And the art of the possible has to influence, the decisions that those business leaders are making. So IT should be talking to the business leader and say, look, we're going to be doing business not like we were in February and March for a lot longer period of time, for 18 months, 12 months, pick a horizon, doesn't really matter. It's going to be a while. How do you, business leader, imagine that work being done? If it's still distributed, fine. Let's look at now mobile device management. of all sorts of endpoints and laptops. Let's look at being able to enhance a bring your own device type program, because maybe I don't have as much corporate control over the device that's being used to do the work wherever the work has to be done anymore. I don't have that centralized control. I still want the control objective, but as you said, I don't want to have to bring everything back into a DC to make a hairpin turn just so it can run through my firewall. I want to be able to establish that control plane in a distributed fashion. Call it a network inversion, lots of sort of different terms around it. But let's work with the business to identify what technological capabilities we can bring forward so that they can that their ideas can germinate, that they can have some sort of good brainstorming about what they want their business to look like over the next 6 to 18 months.
Absolutely. Two things I wanted to bring up. Number one is, quite frankly, most of the people we're talking to don't think it ever goes back to next January or February, right? It'll be a new January and February with a new operating system, if you will, an operating environment. And I think that's what we need to plan for. I've heard people say we've probably stuffed 6 years of cloud transformation into the last 3 months. And that's good. But you know how IT goes, John. You've been in IT 20 years yourself, right? Just because we did 6 years worth of cloud transformation in these 3 months doesn't mean that we now sit by and twiddle our thumbs and say, okay, look, we did it. No, we're going to say, okay, that's done. What do we do now? Well, how do we keep building it? And so, again, new priorities, new thoughts on what's must have and what's nice to have. But let me turn this around a little bit on you, and let's. What are things that we shouldn't be prioritizing? What are things that you see? Well, obviously VPNs was one, but what are some of the other things that you think our IT teams should probably sort of move down the priority list, if not deprecate altogether?
Well, it comes back. There are. Just to pick up on the point that you made earlier, is that impetus that the business has, right? What's their motivation for making this change? Because like you said, I've been around the block a couple of times. You've been around the block covering this area a lot of times. This is nothing new, right? AT&T was playing with the rise of remote work like way back in 1986 or something. They had a big experiment. They were going to send all their call center people home, all the way up to the VP, right? And back then it was the green environment. We were, trying to save the planet. So that was the big impetus then. That didn't last very long, right? It never sort of stuck. Similarly, we tried it again sort of in the 2000s. That was arguably because of cost, right? That notion of, it's cheaper to work in other places, in remote places rather than bring everyone centrally. And again, that never really stuck. So hopefully this pandemic has proven now that we have a set of tools that still give us those good outcomes, right? That still let people be productive, that there's not a lot of friction with. People are more digitally comfortable now than they were sort of 10 years and 20 years ago. So hopefully that's going to give it the impetus to stick. What could disrail that, or what are things that IT people or IT leaders are prone to doing that is going to make us backslide like we have in those sort of two previous examples I mentioned? It's an adherence or an unwillingness to be creative, right? When it comes to security policies, when it comes to inspection, there's lots of different ways to establish security or connectivity. It doesn't have to be on my wire. I am responsible for becoming more and more of a broker of services in this new environment, as opposed to a provider of them, right? So if my IT plan was to, okay, I'm going to build out connectivity to all these remote offices. I'm going to build my own application, right? That's kind of wrong thinking anymore. Now it's about, I'm going to extend my monitoring plane even to a SaaS app, right? And a SaaS app, whether it's one that's third-party provider or one that I've built myself, right? I want that end user experience monitoring. Now, I don't want network monitoring. I don't want sort of disk I/O monitoring. I want some concept of less approximations and more direct sampling. What's the end user experience when they're using that application, right? Because more and more, as an IT leader, I'm not going to be building something. I'm going to be building the integration, or I'm going to be monitoring the integration. It's going to be this application and that application, and I'm going to be making sure that there's an API gateway or a mapping between those two things, right? So anything that is in your IT plan that is sort of build your own or sort of customize, sort of in a precise, detailed kind of way is going to be subject. You're going to want to reevaluate that because your job as it's certainly an infrastructure is going to be more about provisioning and monitoring and deprecating environments rather than sort of making them all on your own. Agreed.
John, we're almost out of time. I wanted to make sure, was there anything else in the study or report that we missed that you want to bring out to the audience?
The return to work framework is pretty straightforward. Again, what we're really trying to do is position IT to get a little bit of breathing room so they can make intelligent choices, so they can reprioritize that project portfolio that they have already on the books. So to that end, we take a risk-based approach. Work with your leadership. Find out what the biggest elements of risk are so that you can use those to then prioritize the specific steps you're going to take to repatriate your people to make sure that their working environment is safe if you are opening offices again, to repatriating their assets, right, to make sure that any asset, home device, any laptop that they bought is not going to, be brought back in and cause disruption or disaster inside of your network or your environment. And last but not least, to make sure that you acknowledge and respect that there's different ways of working that people have found out in this pandemic, right? They're using different workloads. It might not be that you ever sanctioned Trello, but now that might be a really good sort of time planning software that your users want to use. They don't want to not be more productive just because they're now back in the office. How do you make sure that those workloads are quickly sanctioned? What's the minimum viable sort of SaaS evaluation that you need to go through? Right? Use that sort of three-pronged approach, informed by an updated risk analysis to get people back to a position where you can then start the harder work, which is imagining what the future of work 2.0 or 3.0 really is.
Good stuff. Hey, John, thanks for joining us on TechStrong TV. Great framework. You know what, maybe you can come back on in a few weeks. We'll see where we are in this path of the new normal, and we could talk more about it.
That'd be a lot of fun, Alan. It's going to be an interesting few months.
That's for sure. John Anand, Infotech Research Group, here with us on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DEVOPS.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Last week saw this attack on Twitter. I think it was over 100 verified Twitter accounts were corrupted or co-opted for a Bitcoining message. And it was I saw the messages. They were rather elemental, to say the least. What a waste of a good hack, frankly. But you know what? There's lessons to be learned there for all of us. And I had a good conversation with Tom Patterson, who is the Chief Trust Officer at Unisys, about what organizations can take out of the Twitter incident and make sure they're not tomorrow's headline. So here's my conversation with Tom Patterson, Chief Trust Officer at Unisys.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this session here on TechStrong TV. My guest for this session is Tom Patterson from Unisys, and we're going to talk about the recent Twitter hack, if you want to call it a hack, the incident involving some certified accounts on Twitter. Hey Tom, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hey, thanks, Alan. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan.
Thank you. You actually, well, flattery will get you everywhere. But Tom, before we jump into this whole Twitter thing, a little background we should give people. Obviously I mentioned you're with Unisys, but what's your title, and then a little bit of your own personal journey?
Yeah, I'm the Chief Trust Officer here at Unisys, have been for the past 5 years or so. Obviously, Chief Trust Officer is an emerging role. I wrote about it in a book almost now 10 years ago called Mapping Security, about sort of the evolution of the security person within an organization that started out from the secretary filling out forms and checklists, and got to be an IT person that sort of understood how things worked, and then it was a security professional within IT. Then a pure brand of CISO came out, but still reporting generally to the technology group. And the need for that to continue its evolutionary path. Security has been proven to be as much of a business issue as it is a technology issue now. And the concept of a chief trust officer is one that's involved in the overall business and governance of the company, that also understands how security works, but looks at additional things like resiliency, as opposed to just securing all the devices, that looks at cyber insurance and ways to recover, it looks at redundancy in terms of how you do business deals. So it's just a broader evolution of the concept of a chief security officer. And it's one that I've been proud to be one of the pioneers around the world. Unisys is one of the largest companies in the world, along with companies like Cisco, that have installed a chief trust officer. But I believe it's the way of the future. It's something that, for me, it's a very fulfilling career. It allows me to work with all of our stakeholders at the highest level, that they're able to trust what we do and how we do it and the people that we work with. And all of that is so important now when you look at the continuing your operations, making sure you still spit out your widgets or still stay on TV. Yeah, that's really the key, and that's really the goal of a chief trust officer in this day and age.
Sure. I'm listening to you, Tom. I'm thinking back. I founded a company called Still Secure co-founded a company called Still Secure with two friends, 2001. And I remember we did a survey. It's probably around 2002, 2003. It was early on. And, asking how the security person got to be the security person. And back then you didn't have cyber security majors in college like they do now, or areas of concentration. And we were lucky we had SANS, I think at the time, was owned, that had a lock, stock, and barrel. And what amazed me is exactly what you said. Very few of the people who were doing security even considered themselves security people, right? They were the admin who was filling out the form. It was the network guy who, when they installed that firewall with the router, all of a sudden had to become the firewall guy too. And then, it took him down the whole path. Or the help desk person who now had to worry about antivirus software. They didn't have endpoint protection. It was just antivirus software. And we've seen this evolution to a security quote-unquote professional, and of course the rise of the CISO. And we do a bi-weekly show here on TechStrong called CISO Talk with Matt Newfield, right? Matthew from Unisys.
The Unisys CISO, and he's fantastic.
Yep. But look, I when I left Still Secure, I started a company called the CISO Group. We were kind of like parachuting in, setting things up as a CISO for hire. In 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, whatever, move on, leaving behind, hopefully a solid team. But that was a big problem with the CISO, the way it was, set up, is that were they a business executive talking business to the other C-level people at the board level, at the exec level, or were they managing the security team talking bits and bytes and security,
Well, that's what I
compliance,
said
what have you.
in my book, 10 years ago, is that the biggest lie in the security profession is the word officer. It's chief security officers are rarely corporate officers. It's
Right.
just,
They were the manager of the security team.
right. And so the goal in my mind is for companies and organizations to evolve where that top security officer person is actually a corporate officer that has that fiduciary responsibility, that lives and dies with the success for all the stakeholders. And as we get into more ESG type functions in a board and sort of opening up and looking at what the real goals are of the company, that security voice, that trusted security voice that's well versed not only in the bits and bytes, but in how the business is run and how insurance works and what the plans are for M&A and what's the exit strategy, all those things, security factors into everything now. And so getting past that making that real in the CISO or the CSO title, or that's really an important evolutionary step that tells me how companies take security. Do they really value that security voice, or is it just a title?
Yeah. Well, that's what often happened to the CISOs. Once they architected, set everything up, they said, okay, we don't need you doing that piece of it now. We, in essence, want you to be a super admin and go work with the rest of your team, right? Your time here on the board is over.
Right.
But the other thing, and I'm sorry we seem to have gone off, and it's not unusual with me interviewing, yes, is that people immediately think that there has to be some sort of tension between a chief trust officer and the CISO. But no, not the case at all, right? Any tension I think, exists in their own mind.
Certainly in
Unisys, really is.
We work, the chief privacy officer, the chief information security officer, the chief trust officer, all work hand in glove. We all have our own completely separate responsibilities, but we're all coordinated. We talk to each other. We work for the benefit of the one. And I know that happens the same at a lot of the other companies that have adopted this, both in the energy industry, other big technology, global technology companies, some of the European companies that have adopted this. And it's just sort of I don't look at it as replacing what we had. It's just the next step in that continuing evolution from the secretary and the checklist, up to the people really operating these organizations.
Yep. All right. We've got to talk about what we wanted to talk about. So we'll continue that discussion. Maybe you can join Matt on one of our CISO talk shows in the coming weeks, and that'll be it. We'll get another chief trust officer on as well, and we can have a good discussion on it. But I want to talk Twitter, right? So this past week, our audience knows this. Our audience is a tech audience, and but Twitter had,
I think, our mom
a failure.
Alan.
Yeah. Unfortunately, well, what does that say about Twitter? But well, look, we're governed by Twitter, but don't get me started. But Twitter had a what some say is a massive failure, right? Where
even Jack called it, at that level, and it's a bad day for Twitter. When that was allowed to happen for whatever reason, and however it happened, and whoever did it, it was a bad day for Twitter. And Twitter is a part of so many people's lives. It's a part of so many people's businesses. It's part of so many people's government communication strategies now, not just the U.S., but around the world. So it's absolutely it's a big deal, and it deserves to have some attention.
Absolutely. One of the lessons that I wanted to tell people or convey to show people about it is, and this is analogous to our cloud security issues as well, which is no matter how good you are at locking up your Twitter account or your social media account or your cloud infrastructure that you manage, right? When we work or when we rely on third parties, such as a Twitter, right, the application itself, or a cloud provider, right? I'm not going to name. I mean, they're all equal in this regard, or any SaaS application. We do not have visibility, control, but yet it's responsibility still kind of comes to us for what that third party is or isn't doing. So in this case, it's clear that the hack or the break-in, the breach happened at Twitter. There was nothing any of these people's whose accounts were manipulated could have done. It wasn't a breach. They weren't phished. They weren't, it was
right. In
it
the
was
old
nothing
days,
of that.
it'll turn up that somebody's password was password or something. That wasn't
Right.
the case in this case. All these organizations had very strong password. That multi-factor. They took their part of the responsibility very seriously. So that's an important lesson as well. Is that we should use this as a reminder, not make fun of the one company that did get hit in this case, but let's look at our own companies. Let's everybody look at our own companies and say, could this have happened to us? Do we actually have two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication for our remote access? We've moved all of our employees from the safe office to their homes. So did we give them multi-factor authentication when they left?
Well, that's a whole nother,
No, but that's a Twitter-related question
security,
now. Twitter, I want this Twitter hack to be a wake-up call, not for Twitter, who I know will take it seriously, is already taking it seriously and has great resources. I want it to be a wake-up call for every other organization that looks at this and said, wow, that could have happened to us, and those ramifications could be beyond a server stops spinning. It could be our stock crashes or the lives that depend on us are damaged. Those kind of things could happen just because employees are now working from home and companies didn't extend their security perimeter that they had in the company, the safety that they had in their cubicle. They didn't extend that to their home office. And that's a really big message that I want to try and make sure that this Twitter hack allows people to think about internally, not just what happened to this poor company.
I think not part of the issue, but the not the epistemology, but the truth of the matter is, Tom, we move most people remote in a hair on fire kind of manner, right? We boom, things are shutting down. You got to work remote starting tomorrow, and so it's very hard to do a heart transplant without putting you on a heart-lung machine, right? So we could stop the heart and put a new one in.
But this is
we
where
couldn't afford to do that.
Having really good security people that are listened to at the highest levels, at the governance level, at the officer level of an organization, are so important. Because a lot of these smart CISOs, they knew weaknesses happen in virtual private networks. If you just say, well, turn on a VPN and you can work from home, what they're doing is taking all the security risks that are in the kitchen and the kids' playroom and bringing them directly in a safe pipe right into the data centers.
But that's even assuming you had VPN, you had enough VPN capacity.
No, but we watched everybody going out and buying more concentrators and just trying to provision more.
If they could and provision and get them done while no one's in the office.
But the smart CISOs and the smart companies that really listen to that security advice at the highest level were saying, and some said it and done it in advance, but many are saying now, what's the better way? Now that the work from home and the post.
And that's my point. We've got to move out of hair on fire into new normal and say, hey, this is the way it's going to be. What happened. I can't go back in time, right? But I've got to assess what we've got here and make it the best it can be, right? We're no longer needing a heart transplant on a beating heart, right? We need, for companies that haven't transitioned, I know we went through it here in my little company at MediaOps. Around June, I said, look, stop with the hair on fire. We're not running it like, in a fire drill anymore. This is normal. Let's see what normal is. And let's start planning normal.
At Unisys, we looked at that same problem the same way, but in two halves. There's the employee, the users, the remote access people. They need to change their ways. They need to be better cyber educated. They need to be more aware. They need to take things more seriously. Every year, I don't know if you know, every year for over a decade, Unisys runs a global survey of user sentiment about security. What's important? What's an issue? And this year we did it in the time of COVID.
Yeah, Matt and I spoke about it. Matt and I have done a thing on it.
Yeah,
a show.
But one of the findings there that was really important is that the people now working from home that are scared about COVID, legitimately so, are now dropping in concern about phishing. They're dropping in concern about identity theft. And look what happened at Twitter: phishing, identity theft, ways to trick you. There's reasons this happens to people, and when people work for companies, now that is going to step up. And if they're dropping in terms of caring about it, that's the company's issue. So on one hand, we got to work with the employees working remotely. On the other, the companies really have to step up their responsibility and make sure that their security architecture, their security methodologies, just the way that you think about security works in this work from home.
In a new architecture.
This is the way we're going now. People, companies have realized they can trust their employees to work from home. You can do a show from home. It's possible to do this, and that's a change. So they're going to keep that, even if they're medically able to bring everybody back. A lot of them are going to say, hey, it's more efficient to let people work from home. People want to have the more contact and things. So it's here to stay in some form or fashion, and it's really incumbent upon the companies to work with their security professionals to really relook at that architecture. At Unisys, we had this concept of emerge stronger. We're going through it with everybody else. We prepared as we prepared, but our goal was to come through this stronger, more efficient, better able to serve our clients, better able to work. That's
a great emerge stronger. I love it.
It's a big enabler of that emerge stronger movement.
No, look, we've seen it here. I mean, Tom, we've seen spear phishing where and we're not a big target. I mean, we're not Barack Obama or Joe Biden or someone. You know what I mean? I'm Alan Schimmel, but we've seen our people get emails. Right? No, they've gotten emails, supposedly from me telling them to do things. And it's only when you go, and it says Alan Schimmel, you got to mouse over to see it's not really my email address. We've gotten smishing attempts, right? SMS phishing attempts from partners of, again, purportedly from partners of ours that weren't really them.
Well, that's one message.
The bad guys never miss the opportunity.
No, but that's one message we should get out to make sure everybody that watches your show gets. And I know a lot of them already do. But I talk to still a lot of people that when they hear the word phishing, in their mind, it's a poorly worded, spelling errored, Nigerian prince-related ridiculous thing. And they're like, well, we know that, so we would never click on that. They don't realize that today's phishing, especially spear phishing, is perfectly worded, perfectly executed, where they know
looks real good.
Name, and they use it, and they know the thing that you just searched on at Google, and they use that, and they know the details of your life, and they use that to get you to do something you wouldn't otherwise do. And that that we talk about phishing, we educate about phishing. There's PSAs about phishing all the time now. That's a word that our moms know about. Well, we don't want to be, but too many people still think of the Nigerian prince letter of the 1970s. And they
and not what
just worked at Twitter this week. And that's what we need to make sure people understand. It's not that hard in today's world with the information that's available to make a perfectly looking fish. And so you've got to be on your best behavior. If it's in any way ringing any bells, what I do is I just wait. I wait a couple days. If I really need to see that video that I'm pretty sure is from my parents, okay, well, I'll click it, but I'll wait. And let's just see what happens. See if somebody else reports it, see if it pops up on one of the CV reports or something. And usually, you're not unlucky enough to be the first. You're not patient zero on these things. And if you read about what's going on, you can better protect yourself.
Absolutely. So, Tom, a lot of those fall under better education of that remote workforce. But you mentioned another thing, and that is that the companies have to take steps with it, and it goes beyond just educating. One of those things is, and we're doing a report here out of our Accelerated Strategies Group partnership of, what are the security technologies that we need to change or adopt or modify, right? Is VPN, it's a perfect example. Is VPN the right thing for us to invest a lot of money in at this point? and I'm not banging them, but honestly, it may be set up for an architecture that we don't necessarily are going to be using. I'm actually there's a virtual summit coming up in early September called DEVOPS India Summit, and this is I'm going to keynote it. One of my thing is security lessons of COVID. Right? What do we need to do as corporations, as enterprises, as businesses to, what can we learn here? What's the new normal? And what does that mean, not just from educating our end users, because that's a constant battle, right? And a constant chore. But what does it mean in a change of not just process, but technology and tools? And there's going to be winners and losers in that.
Absolutely. And while, I don't want to walk away from the employees and the remote workers, because we need to turn them from a giant attack surface into a huge force for defense of the organization. That has to happen. But on the corporate side, you raise and there's a lot of points. Let me hit three that I think are really important. First off, at the C-suite, at the boardroom, they have to start adopting the concept of resilience versus security as the goal. That change has to be up there rather than down here. And that needs to come. They need to read about methodologies and systems like zero trust. They need to understand sort of at a high level what their goal is to keep spitting out widgets. So that conversation should be on every board agenda, in every upcoming board meeting for the rest of this year and beyond. That's number one. Number two, is this concept that once you're going for resilience, you don't have to have a system that says we will block every single bad attempt to attack our system. We will make sure that
noble but impossible. Right?
Yeah, you can't stop. And so many systems are predicated on don't let that guy click on something. Right. And in reality, the guy will click on something. The girl will click on something. It's just going to happen. It's the attacks are sophisticated. Humans are humans. So if you have a system that's predicated on it has to be perfect, it's doomed to failure. But if you have a system going for resiliency where you expect that someone's going to click on something, that's a different way to look at it. So the first technology that I'm a huge fan of is the concept of microsegmentation. It's the same concept we grew up with, and put this in this data center and that in that data center, and they're segmented. Well, that's two, but that's a gross segmentation. We need micro-segmentation. We need really fine choices, and that's now easily possible. There's micro-segmentation. Unisys makes our own called Stealth, which has been around for 5 or 10 years now, doing it at really critical infrastructure organizations. Governments use it now, and the concept is simple. If Joe gets tricked at his workstation, whether he's working from home or working in a cubicle or working in the data center, and they say, we're going to ransomware all your stuff, encrypt all your stuff, we're going to blow up all your stuff, we're going to trick all your stuff, whatever it is, his world is really small. It's just big enough to do what he needs to do. And that's micro-segmentation. He needs to get into this database. Well, it's not just all or nothing. He needs to get into it to see his payroll check. For that period, that one time. That's the permission that's given. And that's actually, using artificial intelligence, we can deploy that in minutes across a whole organization. That's how Unisys was able to move to work from home in less than 3 days. We moved from, Matt's probably talked about it in a previous episode, but we moved to 90% of more than 90% of our people working from offices, working from home without any VPN use, without any changes. We didn't push new software. They just took their laptop, just like they used to use it at the coffee shop. Now they use it at their home, and they just have access to the same stuff that they need. So microsegmentation is a great way, and what that just means is that you don't expect that nothing will ever get in. You expect actually that something will get in somehow, whether it's a mistake or a state-sponsored attack or an advanced persistent threat, whatever the scary words are that people use to defend themselves, something's going to happen. When it happens, you want to make sure it happens just to a little small part of your enterprise, not to everything.
Limited. Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
I've got my video director Paul here waving at me. My arm's waving, doesn't it? No, we blew through our time, and we've got people in the waiting room. We're at almost 30 minutes. I apologize.
Well, also look at FIDO, the new FIDO recommendations on identity. Everybody should be using two-factor authentication, at least multi-factor authentication. The new FIDO standard is a wonderful thing to adopt now. Help your company emerge stronger as well. So educate your workers, employ microsegmentation throughout your organization today, and then use FIDO to bring in better identity systems so that you can be sure of who you're working with going forward.
Tell you what, we're going to continue this conversation. I'm going to tell Matt to invite you on. We'll schedule it maybe a week or 2 weeks from now, but we will continue it.
Sure.
All right. Hey, Tom Patterson, Chief Trust Officer at Unisys here on TechStrong TV. Thanks for joining us, Tom. We will continue. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV.
Thanks, Alan.
We'll be right back with our next guest. Bye-bye, Tom. James Wickett is one of the genuinely nice guys in this industry, and I really enjoy listening and learning from James. For our Something Old Day, we're going back to TechStrong Con in early June, and James presented there on a new framework called Measure, MEASURE, and it's for measuring your DevSecOps, or it's a framework for approaching DevSecOps in your organization. I think you're going to learn from it. I think you'll like it. Here now is James Wickett from TechStrong Con on Measure.
Hey, glad you tuned in here today. I'm really excited to talk to you. And my goal here for this talk is to help give us a framework for how we can think about DevSecOps. And are there other ways? Sure. But I'm hoping that this Measure framework that we're going to unpack here, that's going to be useful for you, that you can put it to work in your job, or as you think about how you're making the transition inside of your organization to do DevSecOps. Well, who am I? My name is James Wickett. I'm the head of research over at Verica. I am also an author on DevOps courses and DevSecOps courses over at LinkedIn Learning. And I'm an organizer for DevOps Days Austin and DevSecOps Days Austin, which, we're sad aren't happening this year, but we really are excited whenever we're able to have those again. And if you're ever in Austin, look me up. We'd love to hang out. There's a really good DevOps and DevSecOps social scene here. So, well, one of the things that I specialize in is half listening to conference talks in depth. I like that. But if you're like me, I've went ahead and posted these slides on Twitter. So if you want to get a copy of them, you can go to my Twitter account and get the link for them. And then it's on SlideShare, and you can download those as a PDF and use them as you would like. So, because my hope is that this Measure framework is really helpful for us, and you're welcome to take it, use it. Give link backs as much as you can, as you'll see that I try to do throughout this whole presentation. Well, I'd like to take us back and learn something from history. I'd like to tell you a story about a startup that was going on in a large enterprise all the way back in 1896. Well, we follow the person of William Crush. Now, Crush was the member of the internal think tank that was focused on doing digital transformation over at the Katy, or the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railway. Now, he was a member of this, fast-growing, cutting-edge transportation industry, and an industry that was pretty familiar with disruption by this time. How we like disruption, and there was these events going on, and Crush kind of noticed this around the country, where people were taking unused engines and crashing them together for a spectator type event. Now, so his idea was, let's go ahead and take that idea, but those are having some problems, I should say that, because they were trying to charge people tickets to be able to get in to see it. But to actually crash two trains together, you need a very large land area, a very large stadium. You have to block off a big or a very large natural kind of area. And a lot of people, instead of paying the ticket prices in places like Ohio, they would just climb up in the trees to get a view of the event. And so many of them weren't profitable. Sometimes they weren't able to actually get the event off the ground. Well, Crush's VC pitch deck talked about the user experience and had some of the most incredible experience metrics that he was going to get out of these events. So, train demolition events were popular, but you had to pay for them, and not everybody was ready to do that. So his idea was, what if we could just stream them and sell subscription services and ads around the user experience? Well, the user adoption curve was going to be huge and amazing, and the profit would just come in multiple different avenues. Of course, the VCs loved this, because Crush had really studied up. He had figured out, how to do something for free, yet also kind of get to an MVP type product. Well, his MVP was taking out some Google ads and setting up a Kickstarter campaign, and you could get in to watch the trains crash for free, but you had to actually ride on the Katy to get in. And so he was selling tickets, and so anywhere you would buy a ticket in on that day, and you would get access to be able to go see the event. Well, this was phenomenally successful. He was able to track ticket sales, able to see how well it was going. And so on the day of September 15th, 1896, which was several months out from whenever he started selling tickets and doing all the promotion, calling it the crash of the Iron Titans and other stuff like that, he started realizing, like, this is going to be a big event. In fact, it was so big that they needed to set up a space for this event to happen, and they named the place in honor of William Crush. They named it Crush, Texas. It's geographically located near modern-day Waco. It's a couple miles outside of town off the main interstate, I-35, which runs through there if you're familiar with Texas. And population estimates of how many people came and populated Crush, Texas it was a town for a day, was about 40,000 people. Ranges estimates from 30 to 50,000. So Crush was seeing the ticket sales. He already knew the Kickstarter campaign was launching and was going to be a success, and he had to get some law officers. He got 200 or so of those. They built a temporary makeshift jail. They had water wells dug for everybody, so they'd be well hydrated. There was entertainment while people were waiting. There was a midway set up. There was concession stands. There was other dollar stream revenue opportunities for them. And Crush also, for the free event, he's selling concessions. There's the games. He also sold ad spots. So the original banner ads were placed here on the sides of the trains. You can see them just on the sides there, especially on the one on the far right there. Now, Crush wasn't just at this from a business perspective, and he knew that it had to be a safe event for people to go to. One of the problems was, and this is something that Crush is very concerned with, was boilers often, or not often, but sometimes would explode in train engines. And so this picture, I believe, came from the 1850s, about 40 to 50 years before the event. And sometimes you'd just be driving, you'd be on the train, and something would happen, and a boiler would explode. Sometimes it would injure people, to get the train off the line. This sometimes happened because, like, some of the pipes would get rusty. There would be just an event that would sort of trigger the whole engine to explode there. So Crush knew this. It wasn't like he was unaware of it, but he started to put in some precautions in place. So he tried to build up as much safety margin as he could. So he had engineers evaluate the boilers in these decommissioned engines to see if they were going to hold. They said that they would. He laid 4 miles of additional track outside of the main lines, so that as they kind of prepare the trains to get started, they had 1 mile of runway each, and then the collision would kind of take place in the middle. But anything that damaged the track or anything that happened with the event would sort of not damage any sort of operations of the actual train over time. He kept the crowd back at 200 yards. He allowed the press, or some members of the press with cameras, to be at 100 yards. Well, the event had grown in popularity, like I mentioned, and there was publicity all over for it. And so Thomas Edison actually heard about it, and he had this moving picture machine, and he was ready to get some of the first footage that would be really great for a Netflix stream in the future generation. And so he sent one of his proteges there to capture the event. Well, the time came. It was 4 p.m., September 15th, 1896. Roughly 40,000 people in this kind of natural stadium type landmass, about it kind of had a bowl shaped into it. And so the crowds were gathered. Everyone was ready for the big crash at Crush to happen. And in the words of one commentator, one spectator, they said this: the rumble of the two trains, it was faint and far off at first, but growing nearer and more distinct with each fleeting second. It was like the gathering force of a cyclone. There's an incredible image of the two trains colliding at somewhere in between 90, estimates between 190 and 120 miles per hour. And here they are, right at impact. And right after impact, 1 second after impact, both boilers exploded. So there was this unmitigated vulnerability in the system. And so most people reported that there was the first crash, and then about a second later, the explosion. And the steam and iron and wood filled the skies. Some people described it like battles that they had witnessed in their life. And there was a kind of mass chaos. Shrapnel, many people got injured, several died. Of course, after the event happened, the natural reaction of any Texan is, oh, let's get over there and get a souvenir, a memento, which actually resulted in more injuries and burns. I can only make that joke because I'm from Texas, or I've been here long enough, I guess. But so now we have this situation as it unfolded. What happened in the aftermath? Well, estimates differ, but most kind of agree that 4 people died. Crush was summarily fired from the Katy. There was widespread injuries across the crowd. Lawyers were later brought in to handle settlements, to pay people out for the different injuries and different types. Cleanup took weeks afterward to happen, and this was sort of all kind of put in this historical monument marker at the crash at Crush, right outside of Waco. I believe this has now been moved near the post office downtown Waco, if you're ever in town and you want to go check it out. Now, interestingly enough, the Katy realized that they had made a mistake in firing Crush, and a few days later, kind of not, he wasn't subject to all the social media scrutiny that we are today, but he ended up getting rehired by the Katy and working there for 44 more years, because they realized he did take a lot of precautions, and this could have happened to anyone. And also, interestingly enough, copycat events and other folks trying to do this exact same thing started to pop up all around the country. In fact, it was Crush who had unlocked kind of the winning business model of how to make these events work. And in the hundreds of events that happened after the crash at Crush, all the boilers held. So it's not like this was just a horrible idea on the face of it. It's that we had these problems inside of the system that kind of reared their head in this one instance. So some of the things we've learned from this, and I think that'll help us tie into what we do in our systems that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, is there's a safety margin that exists in all systems. We just may not know what it is. Also, sometimes configuration errors, a small change in one part can have an outsized effect in another part. That's the bullwhip effect. Also, experimentation is one of the best ways to find vulnerabilities, but Crush wasn't able to actually experiment in the way that we can today, especially with modern software. And I liked how they handled Crush's firing and then rehiring, or like reevaluating. Like, it wasn't Crush. There was no root cause for why this happened. So how does this tie in? And so those are some of those things, those might be rattling around in your head. And as we go through DevSecOps and we talk through Measure and we kind of go through the framework, you'll see bits and pieces of some of those learnings kind of scattered throughout. So I'd like to talk, like, how do we think of DevSecOps? Well, first we could start with DevOps. And DevOps is this epistemological breakthrough that takes people who are separate and joins them around a common problem whenever they're living in kind of this distributed compute architecture. And it was sort of born out of necessity, but also born out of like a camaraderie around a common problem. And early days of DevOps, we realized we were putting 10 developers to 1 operations person. And there's this inequitable distribution of labor that's just not what we want to see for teams. And it wasn't very productive. And it created this siloization where people are throwing things over the wall. And security often, finds itself in the same position that operations did at the start of the DevOps movement. So now we're seeing where when a team has maybe 100 developers and 10 operations, they would maybe only have 1 security person. So this has resulted in security's siloization. And how it really struggles to provide value in most organizations. So I have three quotes that I'd like to put in front of you that would sort of illustrate that point. The first quote is by Steve Belovin. He says, "Companies are spending a great deal on security, but we read of massive computer-related attacks. So clearly something is wrong. And the root of the problem is twofold. We're protecting the wrong things and we're hurting productivity in the process." Okay, that's particularly concerning to somebody who cares about the security industry. Okay, what's another one? The SANS 2018 DevSecOps survey said one of their key findings was, while engineering teams are busy deploying leading edge technologies, security teams are still focused on fighting yesterday's battles. Another viewpoint here is the Agile Application Security book has this quote: "Many security teams still work with a worldview where their goal is to inhibit change as much as possible." So out of these three kind of problem statement quotes, we can sort of think of, there needs to be this new approach. And we've often kind of call it this DevSecOps, or this person who is able to kind of, put all these things together. It's not a tool. It's not a CI/CD pipeline that you can cobble together. It's not something that you can buy from a vendor. This is a person. It's a person who's inclusive of other people and help them participate in the movement where we bring security and DevOps together. And so that's where kind of the Measure framework was born. And so I think of the DevSecOps framework for Measure as a way to help us sort of codify or think about, or some way to process how we think about DevSecOps in kind of the world that we live in today. So what is Measure? Well, it's maker-driven. It's experimentation, automation, safety, the idea of unrestrained sharing, bringing in the rugged movement and rugged tribe, as well as embodying empathy. Well, we're going to take a turn at each of these and just sort of go through a few key things that are important for them. So let's start with maker-driven. So security, it's not a discipline where we're security first. It's actually part of a larger discipline of software engineering. And sometimes security we don't always see ourselves in that way. We see ourselves as like a security expert, and we have to deal with software, but really we're part of the overall umbrella of software engineering. So I think first and foremost is understanding internally that we are software engineers, and we're just not we're not just security professionals who are specialists in software. And by that kind of changes the way we approach problems. Like, security solves problems by writing code. I used to have this slide that says everyone in security should write code, and then I got a lot of like hate mail on Twitter, or hate tweets, or however you want to call it. The problem is that I don't want to be divisive like that and make, just because if you don't know how to write code, that like somehow that makes you less of a valuable person, or that you're not able to participate in the team. But I would challenge you. I can't think of a really I can't think of a team or a position today that wouldn't be helped by writing code and helping to solve problems by writing code and participating in software development together. And so I'm still unsure why this is really a hot take in our industry. I like these books. You can learn how to read. You can learn how to write code in just these two simple books, right? Of course I'm joking, kind of, right? But let's be honest. Like, security already uses DSLs, so we're already kind of have some codified things. This is very similar to Ops. Like, Ops had in early days, CF Engine, Chef, Puppet. Like, they were already sort of thinking infrastructure as code. There's already security as code. Any security engineer who's had to fiddle with WAF regex rules can agree with this, right? But we're looking for a security team that's participating in software delivery. And we do this because we want to build empathy, get shared familiarity with other tools and with the teams. It gives us this flexibility where now we can like shift left, shift right. Wherever we want to shift in the pipeline, we can do that. We start thinking security as code, policy as code. And this is a successful pattern. This is a pattern that I've seen at very successful DevSecOps teams of all sizes. Another reason why being a maker is important is because we have to stop classifying things as like security problems and just regular problems, and we start thinking more holistically about it. Like, a bug is a bug is a bug. And this is important because I could pull out defect density studies that have gone in different journals over the last 30 years, and they range from anywhere from like half of a defect per 1,000 lines of code to 10 defects per 1,000 lines of code, and we could spend time kind of going over those. But the big takeaway here is, like, no matter what you look at, defect density is never zero. You still have humans writing code. You will not have code that is defect free. So, and why is that important? You're like, I just write 500 lines of code in the framework of choice, and then but in reality, that can actually turn into, like, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 lines of code. Different research has been done by this and have shown that the simple frameworks and things that make coding easy and writing code easy, we're actually executing quite a bit of dependencies underneath. Well, so I think that we can start seeing a place where, like, makers combine, and you see security and developers collaborate with each other. They can do this through testing, and you pick the framework that you like, the way that your approach that you're more used to. Developing team standards together, how are you doing reviews, handling your config, how you make comments in code, commits, kind of building up how you approach this as a team. Also, I think security and developers work together when they sort of focus on code smells and patterns and refactoring. Security training type stuff can go in here. Adding instrumentation observability to provide feedback loops from what's actually going on in your system to know if part of your system actually is under attack or is not. Like, those are the feedback loops that you're looking for in this kind of setup. The Agile Application Security book has this quote. They say, the goal should be to come up with a set of automated tests that probe and check security configurations and runtime system behavior for security features that will execute every time the system is built and every time it's deployed. Yeah, the DevSecOps community survey in 2019 said that the reason why people are taking this DevSecOps journey, why people are kind of rallying around why DevSecOps is so important, is because they're connecting quality and security. So 1 in 4 respondents were like, yeah, we want to do this because we think security is synonymous with quality, and we want to improve the quality of our application. So I feel like, to summarize, like, we see that being maker driven, what does that mean? That sees security as part of the overall engineering effort, not as a separate thing. They're not an other, they're part of the tribe. We're also using code, not vendors. You can wire in vendors, but you do it in a way that kind of hooks in with the development practices and operation tooling that people are used to using. And you view quality as a way to bring security in, and you kind of connect those two things inside of your organization. And once you do that, like, you have a better impetus to be able to kind of go down this DevSecOps journey. Okay, well, let's move on past being a maker, and let's talk about experimentation. That's what the E in Measure is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about chaos engineering. There's a new book out that just came out. It's actually by a friend of mine and the CEO of the company I work for, Casey Rosenthal, but it's called Chaos Engineering. It's a great book. You should totally check it out. It's hot off the presses. And if you're interested, I have a link later on how I can get you a free copy if you want. But it's also just available on Amazon. But we're going to kind of go through, and I want to specifically call out chaos engineering here because that is not so much, you'll find out if you're kind of unfamiliar, like, chaos engineering is not so much about causing chaos, but it's about learning in complex systems and using experimentation as the method to do that. So Aaron Reinhardt says, who's a security pro, he says, and kind of coins security chaos engineering, that security incidents are not effective measures of detection because at that point it's already too late. And one of the things we want to do is we want to create feedback loops about security and its effectiveness. And Aaron also goes on to say that the security discipline of experimentation is done in order to build confidence in the system's ability to defend against malicious conditions. So this is kind of where we're going to get in chaos engineering and where it meets security. So security chaos engineering, they're experiments that span both engineering and security. People are able to opt out of them if they want. We're building learning out of this, and we're kind of controlling the blast radius for experiments. And we think of this as more of a empirical type discipline. Michael Nygaard in the second edition of the book Release It, which is a great book, totally recommend it, says chaos engineering is empirical rather than formal. We don't use models to understand what the system does, or what the system should do, we run experiments to learn what it does. So what are some security problems specifically that we face in complex systems? And I imagine if we were face to face in a crowd, there would be some heads nodding at this, because I think that some of this stuff really resonated with me whenever I first started to wrestle with it, and I see other people deal with the same thing. But security problems we see in our complex systems that we run every day. We have configuration drift that happens. We have regressions where we kind of release something that we have previously fixed. We see role and privilege drift, both at the user layer and at the application layer. We add in new codes or microservices, and those cause downstream effects that we didn't really intend. Sometimes we also put our security controls in the wrong locations, either we do it to like satisfy compliance requirements. We do it because we're worried about, or we don't have the right infrastructure in place to monitor something, or maybe we put the security controls in the wrong location because it was the right location before, but then we shifted everything around. We're continuously delivering, and now it's in the wrong spot. And we also have this bullwhip effect, which I alluded to earlier. It's this: we have small changes in one part of the system has an outsized effect on the other side. Well, I think as we think about security chaos engineering, it's good to say what security chaos does not do. Security chaos engineering does not do. Well, it doesn't validate a config, it exercises it. It doesn't just check off the privileges, it attempts to thwart them. It's not trusting network settings, but it's trying to send actual real attack traffic or real traffic to see if that's actually the control that we thought is actually working. It doesn't just check app policy, it actually interacts with the application. And the 4 steps to security chaos engineering are much like the steps of just regular chaos engineering. It's defining a behavior of a expected behavior of a security defense. It's hypothesizing that, hey, whenever we have some security problems or some turbulence or whenever that's introduced, that it's either going to be prevented, remediated, or detected. And we introduce a variable that introduces that security turbulence. And that's the experimentation part of it. And we're saying, can we disprove the hypothesis by looking for a difference in what we expected and the actual behavior? So there's several benefits of experimentation. So it's measured and repeatable. We see we get results that are based on our needs. We actually understand what our application can handle, what we can do. We get to know some of the safety boundaries and safety margin in our system. We end up creating actionable outcomes that other engineers, other developers can take and work with. And this is really one of the only proven methods to uncover truths or understanding or an insight into a complex system. We're going to cover complex systems here in a second, but if you're interested more on experimentation, there's principlesofchaos.org. I think Release It, Michael Nygaard's chapter on chaos engineering in the 2nd edition is phenomenal. A really great way to help inject it. If you're still thinking of chaos engineering in the sense of chaos monkey and breaking all the things or that kind of stuff, read Release It. You'll get a completely new view of how it's approached and what it means. There's a DevOps Enterprise Summit talk that I gave with Shannon Leitz. Her Twitter handle is DevSecOps. I think that's pretty helpful for thinking about experimentation. And there's that book, the Chaos Engineering book that Casey and Nora Jones wrote. And we have a copy. We're giving some of those away over at verica.io/book if you're interested. And I think I have a link to that at the end of the presentation. But if not, hit me up on Twitter and I can get that over to you as well. But okay. Let's move over to A, automation in Measure. So I find this to be really interesting. In the DevSecOps 2019 survey, it says, what point in the development process does your organization perform automated application security analysis? Well, far and away, anybody who's in kind of the elite practice group or more mature practice group, they're doing it all across the pipeline at all different stages. So kind of predictable. You could have, you would have said, yeah, that totally makes sense that someone who actually thinks about a pipeline, that's where they put all the tooling. What was not predictable to me is what kind of application security tooling are people using? The choices are web application firewall, container and application security, open source governance, status application analysis, dynamic application analysis. So, and again, the front runners, the people who are more mature in their DevOps practices, they have used them more and they're putting them in more places across the pipeline. That's awesome. But most of these tools are like 15-year-old type tools, or at least the categories are. like web application firewalls, going on almost 2 decades now. Open source, you could kind of say application security has been around for about the same amount of time. Container security, okay, that's more new. Open source governance, that's not exactly a new field. Static application analysis, same thing. It's very, very old. Dynamic application analysis, also very, very old. So it's not that we've sort of innovated and now we're doing all this other stuff. We're actually just taking the best practices that we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. We've updated it, put it in more places inside of our pipeline, and instrumenting it and doing things in kind of a more connected way. People call this shift left or sometimes shift right if you're putting more stuff in feedback on production. So I think this is really interesting to me, because now we're actually just taking up all the things we've said over the last couple of decades. We're actually implementing them and doing them faster and being better at it. The Agile Application Security books is, one of our main goals here of the automation process can be that we can treat deploys as standard routine changes, things that have already been pre-approved by management, and then don't require this like heavyweight change control board, meeting or some sort of review. Okay, let's move on to